There are two endings to The Force Unleashed. In the light side ending, Galen Marek decides to attack the Emperor and withstands his Force lightning long enough for his friends to escape. In that ending, he valiantly sacrifices his life by using all of his titanic power to push away Sidious's lightning. But there was a second, more sinister ending to Starkiller's story. In the dark side ending, he would take his revenge on Vader, slaughter the master who had tormented him for so long. He then attempted to kill Sidious, only for the Emperor to overpower him and crush him under the rogue shadow. Like Vader, he would awake on an operating table, now covered in the mechanical armor of the ancient Sith Stalker. His power now cut down for where it had once been. And while this seems like Sidious just reinventing Vader a second time, it is so much more. The Sith Stalker was a project dating all the way back to the era of the Ancients. Starkiller had become Sidious's vision of reawakening that twisted tradition, a way of perfecting what he had once tried on Darth Vader. In today's Holocron, we are going to dive into everything we know about the Sith Stalker, and how Galen Marek could have become the perfect manifestation of the most insidious experiment the Sith ever created. Very little is actually known about the Sith Stalker's history. This is likely due to the fact that almost all of them were Sith assassins. True to their job description, one isn't supposed to know much about them. The assassins were very different than traditional Sith warriors. They stuck to the shadows and used ambush tactics rather than engage in open combat. They were trained on an entirely separate planet than the Sith warriors and marauders were. This made their tactics obscure, even to other members of the Sith Order. The assassin class perfected the art of Force conceal, and frequently employed the use of stealth field generators. These were their personal cloaking devices that kept one completely invisible to the naked eye when outside of combat. Hardly any data exists on Sith assassins because the Jedi often didn't survive long enough to actually record anything about them. During the days where they saw the most use though, was with the first Jedi Purge. The assassins here were used like Sidious would use the Inquisitors. Their job was to pick off the leftover Jedi that Nihilus and Sion simply could not find. But it was from their ranks that the Stalkers would emerge. While the Sith assassins were few, the Stalkers were even fewer. Their armor was originally adopted by assassins because it struck fear into their enemies. But soon it came to mean something else entirely. Admittedly, our information is slim since the Stalkers aren't really explored in a lot of material outside of The Force Unleashed. But now that we can piece it all together, the Sith Lords of old would decide that their assassins needed upgrades, and it was here where their origins form. The Lords of Darkness are always attempting to make their followers into something far more formidable. That insatiable Sith desire to constantly improve and upgrade leads them to the dark and twisted places of the galaxy. The Stalker is one of the final proofs of this vision. Undergoing a horrific transformation process, the Sith Lords turned their powerful minions into cyborgs, not like what happened with Darth Vader, but the knowledge they used was far more refined. Their goal wasn't just to make any cybernetic fighter, that had already been done. Their intention was to rebuild the body with a Force-sensitive warrior in mind. From what we can tell, the knowledge of how to create these terrifying beings is lost to history. This led Palpatine to creating Vader's suit based on what he had done with Grievous rather than using traditional Sith knowledge. However, we believe that if Palpatine had possessed the knowledge of how the Sith Stalker worked here, Vader would have looked much different. But at some point, he would achieve the complete knowledge of the Sith Stalkers, as he wisely kept it for himself, lest Vader found out how he could be improved. And when the opportunity presented itself, in the dark side alternate ending of The Force Unleashed, Sidious would use this knowledge to create a better Vader. By this point, the Emperor was growing frustrated with his apprentice. Vader was not performing the way he wanted, and what was worse is that Vader seemed to be slowing. He was becoming a relic of the past. This is why he welcomed Starkiller into becoming a new apprentice. In the dark ending, Galen would kill Vader once and for all, and would approach Palpatine. The Emperor had already killed Bail Organa, and had tortured Rom Koda to the brink of death. Urged Galen to kill Master Koda, and prove himself as a worthy new disciple. Instead, Starkiller turned on the Emperor and attempted to strike him down, but Palpatine had fully expected this, explaining that since Starkiller had betrayed his own master and his friends, Palpatine knew that he would soon betray him as well. After ragdolling him against the wall with Force lightning, Sidious uses the Force to summon Starkiller's ship through the viewport of the Death Star, crashing it right on top of the helpless Galen. Now that his friends were dead and his body destroyed, he would have died, but instead, Palpatine repeated his work with Vader. Now that his apprentice had been killed, he still needed an agent to carry out the bidding of the Empire, and he now had the knowledge of the Sith Stalker. So he would remake Vader, but so much better. Starkiller's body had been left in an even worse state than Vader's had been, his lower half had now been completely destroyed, his lungs were crushed, and all of his bones were broken. Galen Marek was closer to the state that Dooku found Grievous in prior to his transformation than he was Vader. Another being mighty in the Force, cut far below his potential. Sidious was beyond disappointed at the turnout, and yet again, another prospective Vader had been relieved of his grandiose potential. But unlike with his former apprentice, Sidious made no attempts to cover up the fact that Starkiller was a tool to him. He outright told him that he'd been useful only until Sidious would find a new apprentice. Until that time, Galen was nothing more than a slave and a weapon. Upon the operating table, we actually find out the specifications of the Sith Stalker armor. The armor was not something that the Stalkers actually wore, it was painfully grafted onto their flesh and their bone. The majority of Galen's arms were still intact. The armor replaced most of his hands with prosthetics, but left enough flesh towards the fingers to allow the user to use Force lightning. The extended claws on each finger appear to have a practical purpose in conducting the lightning as well, conducting it outwards so that it didn't backfire on the user in their cybernetics. This is already a massive upgrade from Vader's armor, which had prohibited him from using this ability altogether. But then again, Vader didn't have any organic parts or arms left, so he probably wouldn't have been able to conjure lightning anyway. But besides that, there were several other notable upgrades given to Starkiller. While we don't have any specs on his helmet, it's likely that it gave him a heads-up display similar to Vader, which fed him information on the battlefield terrain and had a built-in comlink. Also, as a side observation, some version of the Stalker helmet, specifically the Dark Lord armor, was designed shifted slightly to connect deeper with the Sith roots. Vader's skull-like mask was modeled after the Sith war droids, but the Dark Lord Starkiller helmet bears a striking similarity to the mask of Tulak Horde. Not sure how much Starkiller would know about this ancient Sith Lord, or if he would want to pay homage to him, but it's clear that Darth Sidious has some sort of inspiration here. The Stalker helmet also seems to have a breathing apparatus which connects to Starkiller's crushed lungs, but his cybernetic breathing mechanism was protected by his chest armor. This instantly gets rid of one of the greatest weaknesses of Vader's armor, as his control panel was hidden away, unlike Vader's armor. Also unlike Vader, the Sith Stalker's breathing mechanism was controlled by the user rather than on automation. We're able to discern this by how erratic and forced Starkiller's breathing pattern becomes in the direct comparison to the stable and rhythmic breaths of Darth Vader. Why this in particular is such an important upgrade is because when one can control their breathing, one can better control their power output. Vader had a hard time exerting himself without causing damage or disrupting his mechanized breathing cycle. Starkiller would not have this problem at all, and would be able to use much more force and power when in combat. Not to mention, all of his armor and cybernetics were created with the purpose of not hindering any movement. Vader's armor forced him to change everything about his lifestyle and his combat style. It was clunky, hefty, and cumbersome. He had a limited range of movement, and had to completely shift his lightsaber form to accommodate for all of these new limitations. But the Stalkers had no issue of this nature whatsoever, and neither did Starkiller. He was able to remain as nimble and acrobatic as he was before, and he didn't have to alter his lightsaber form and begin anew. With all of these changes, Starkiller was able to retain the immense power he once had. However, his potential was limited to the power that he had already acquired, and he would never be able to surpass Sidious. But when it came to his cybernetics, he had everything that Vader could have had, but he never did. What Darth Vader would look like if he managed to upgrade his armor is one of the biggest questions in all of the lore, or if his suit hadn't been so limiting. Well, we believe that this is it. I think if we put the traditional Vader helmet on the Sith Stalker armor, we get our answer. This was the solution to all the problems plaguing Darth Vader's original suit. Of course, it should be noted that Palpatine intentionally built the suit to subpar materials in order to purposefully limit Vader and make it far more painful for him. But perhaps he could have retained the punishment aspect of his armor if he had known about the Stalker armor back then. Maybe Palpatine would have even utilized the Stalker method on Vader instead. The ancient Sith had perfected the art of creating terrifying warriors as a mirage between Force-sensitive man and machine. Palpatine seemed to have revived this twisted tradition by turning broken warriors into living weapons that operated purely through pain. Of course, look to Vader and Grievous. In his book titled The Creation of Monsters, Sidious writes that he considered Vader to be his minor masterpiece, the perfect monster. And despite the fact that his monster turned against him, if given the opportunity to create Vader again, he would have done it, and with zeal. In the dark side ending of The Force Unleashed, Palpatine got his wish, and was able to take another crack at making Darth Vader. But this time, he had gorged himself on Sith knowledge. He had perfected the art of his predecessors, and he had given new life to a sickening ancient experiment. The Stalkers were envisioned as the Ancients as the purest embodiment of the dark side's cold, predatory purpose, a horrific fusion of a Force-sensitive warrior and a relentless machine. Unlike Sith apprentices who were shaped by ambition and the promises of power, the Stalkers were never intended to inherit any legacy or philosophy. They existed solely as weapons, obedient, merciless, stripped of identity. On the battlefield, they moved with an eerie, inhuman precision. Clad in grafted armor that melded metal to flesh, they advanced through the ranks of the Jedi Order with an almost animalistic hunger, yet utterly devoid of rage or passion. They killed not out of anger, but because it was their only purpose. Witnesses described them as phantoms, silent, unstoppable, cutting down defenders with surgical efficiency, and then disappearing back into the shadow. Emperor Palpatine, ever the student of the ancient tradition, drew inspiration from these monstrous creations. He saw in them the potential to revive a forgotten Sith tactic, to create a living instrument of terror whose loyalty would never waver. When he discovered the raw power of Galen Marek, he resolved to create a modern incarnation of the Stalker, one bound by cybernetics and psychological conditioning. Unlike an apprentice, Galen would never be groomed for succession. He would never be allowed to question or aspire. He would simply become an extension of will, a perfected Stalker, reimagined for a new age, a grotesque testament to the dark side's capacity to consume both body and spirit until nothing remained. Nothing but a weapon and the will of a master. But that was a documentation of the Stalker armor worn by the Dark Lord Starkiller. I wanted to take this video and give you my thoughts concerning the aspects of Starkiller's character that goes under the radar. Sidious always had a purpose for everything he does, and usually that purpose pertains to something crazy in the form of an experiment. The Emperor is always taking inspiration from the ancients that came before him. When taking notes about the Stalker armor, I love the connection to the ancient Sith and their old philosophies. But what do you think? Do you believe that there is much more to this alternate timeline's armor that we have yet to uncover? And do you wish that we had gotten more information about the original Stalkers? Let us know in the comments down below your thoughts. And as always, we're eager to see you in the next holocron. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.